At my husband's birthday party. My husband had the heart to lock me out in the pouring rain, because I threw out his mistress who came to my home to celebrate with him. As I shivered outside, I watched through the window as they laughed, enjoying the party and opening gifts. An hour later, a black luxury car pulled up in front of the house. I was shocked because it was my grandmother from my small hometown, a billionaire. When my grandmother got out of the car, she saw me shivering, then looked at the house and said one word, "Destroy it." And what happened next sent my husband into hysterics. The atmosphere in the grand house was electric and festive that night. The crystal chandelier in the great room blazed with light, casting reflections across the impeccably decorated space. The sound of soft music mingled with the laughter of the guests who filled every corner of our home. It was the night of my husband Robert's birthday, and I had spent the entire day ensuring everything was perfect. My feet ached tremendously because I hadn't stopped moving since morning, from supervising the caterers and arranging the decorations to making sure Robert's suit was pressed and ready. But I pushed the exhaustion far from my mind for the sake of seeing a happy smile on my husband's face. I wanted this to be a special night for him. I stood in a corner of the room holding a tray of drinks, watching Robert laugh heartily with his business partners. He looked so handsome and charismatic. However, one thing had been nagging at my heart since the party began. Robert hadn't introduced me to any of his friends as his wife. He let me scurry back and forth, serving guests like a waitress. Even when I brought him a drink, he just gave a brief nod without meeting my eyes, as if I were a stranger paid to work there. I tried to swallow the sting in my heart. Maybe he was just too busy, I thought, trying to console myself. I forced a friendly smile for every guest, even though some of them looked down on me for my simple appearance. I wasn't wearing a lavish gown like the wives of Robert's business associates. I simply wore my best modest dress, the nicest outfit I owned, because Robert always limited my allowance for personal expenses. Suddenly, the chatter near the entrance paused. The murmur of conversation died down, replaced by whispers of admiration. I turned towards the door and saw a woman stride in with an air of complete confidence. It was Luna. She wore a glittering, extravagant party dress that boldly showcased her figure. Her makeup was heavy yet expensive, and her hair was styled in a modern, chic updo. She sauntered in as if she were the star of the party. What made my chest tighten was Robert's reaction. As soon as he saw Luna, his face lit up, far brighter than when he had seen me that morning. Robert immediately excused himself from his conversation and walked quickly to greet Luna with a wide grin. Without a trace of shame, Luna looped her arm through Robert's in front of everyone. They looked incredibly close and intimate, like a perfectly matched husband and wife. My heart sank at the sight. I gripped the edge of the tray I was holding until my knuckles turned white. As if that weren't enough, Vivian, my mother-in-law, emerged from the crowd. Vivian's face, usually sour and critical whenever she looked at me, transformed into one of warmth and affection upon seeing Luna. Vivian hugged Luna tightly, kissing her on both cheeks, and then proudly took her hand. She led Luna to the center of the room and began introducing her to important guests, her voice booming as she praised Luna's beauty and success. As if Luna were the ideal daughter-in-law she had always boasted about, I felt my world slowly crumbling. I was Robert's legal wife. I was the one who cared for Vivian when she was sick. I was the one who managed this entire household and stood by Robert from the beginning when he had nothing. But tonight, in my own home, I was treated like an invisible specter. Luna, the woman I knew was having an affair with my husband, was being treated like a queen. I fought back tears, walking towards them with trembling steps. I couldn't just stand by and let my dignity be trampled like this. I placed the tray on a nearby table with a slight clatter, causing a few people to turn their heads. I approached Robert, who was laughing at something Luna had whispered to him. I looked at him with a gaze that was both hurt and firm. I asked Robert what all of this meant. Why was this woman here, acting as if she were the lady of the house? My voice shook with suppressed rage. Robert shot me a cold glare. The smile on his face vanished instantly. He hissed at me quietly, telling me not to make a scene at his party. But Luna just chuckled, a laugh that sounded deeply mocking to my ears. Luna said in a coy tone that she just wanted to celebrate the birthday of someone dear to her, and she asked why I was being so uptight and jealous. Her words ignited my fury. I pointed towards the door and, in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, I told Luna to get out of my house right now. The party suddenly fell silent. All eyes were on us. The music seemed to stop. Vivian immediately stepped forward to defend Luna. She scolded me in public, saying I was a wife with no manners for kicking out an honored guest. Vivian said Luna was far classier and more deserving of being here than I was, someone who only brought shame. My heart shattered into a million pieces, hearing my own mother-in-law's words. I looked at Robert, hoping he would defend me, hoping he would remember my years of devotion. But it was a futile hope. Robert stared at me with fury in his eyes. His face was red, not with anger at Luna or his mother, but at me. Robert grabbed my wrist roughly. His grip was so tight it hurt. He pulled me away from the whispering crowd of guests. Robert said with a menacing tone that I had ruined his birthday party. He said I was ungrateful and only knew how to cause trouble. I tried to break free, defending myself by saying I was only protecting my dignity as his wife. But Robert wouldn't listen. He continued to drag me towards the large front door. Luna and Vivian watched with triumphant smiles on their faces. Not a single guest dared to intervene. I stumbled to keep up with Robert's long, fast strides. My tears finally streamed down my cheeks. I begged Robert to let me go, but he was deaf to my cries. We reached the front door. Outside, thunder rumbled and the rain began to pour down heavily, as if the sky itself was weeping for my fate. Robert threw the main door open violently. A fierce wind mixed with rain slapped against our faces. He shoved me out with such force that I staggered and nearly fell on the wet porch. He pointed a finger at my face and yelled over the storm, saying that if I couldn't accept Luna, then I had no place in this house. He would choose her over me, his own wife. Robert said cruelly, "If Luna has to go, then you have to get out too." Without waiting for my reply, he slammed the heavy wooden door right in my face. The sound of the door slamming shut felt like a death sentence. The click of the lock from inside confirmed that I was well and truly unwanted. I stood frozen in front of that closed door, still in disbelief at what had just happened. My body trembled violently, not just from the cold that was beginning to seep into my bones, but from the immense emotional shock. The rain fell harder, drenching me without mercy. In seconds, my dress was soaked through, clinging coldly to my skin. Rainwater mixed with the tears streaming down my face. I tried the doorknob, hoping Robert was just bluffing, but it was locked tight. I pounded on the door with my fists, calling Robert's name, begging him to open it, but my voice was lost in the roar of the rain and the crack of lightning. There was no answer from inside, no approaching footsteps. I felt so small and helpless. The night wind whipped around me, making the shivering in my body worse. I hugged myself, trying to find a scrap of warmth, but it was useless. The cold rain felt like it was piercing my very marrow. I stepped back slowly from the porch, onto the lawn that was now muddy and puddled with water. My legs felt heavy, as if tied to a great stone. I staggered towards the large window of the great room where the party was taking place. I wanted to see what was happening inside. I wanted to know if Robert felt even a sliver of remorse after throwing me out like trash. What I saw through the rain-streaked glass shattered my heart even more, a pain worse than 1,000 needles. Inside, in that warm, brightly lit room, the party had resumed as if nothing had happened. I saw Robert laughing broadly, his face looking relieved and happy. Beside him stood Luna, now holding the cake knife. Together, they cut into the tall, beautiful birthday cake. Robert's hand covered Luna's on the handle of the knife, a moment that should have been mine. Vivian stood beside them, clapping with a beaming face, looking so proud of her son's new partner. The guests also clapped and laughed, enjoying the delicious food that I had prepared with my own sweat and tears. They were all laughing at my expense. Not a single one of them cared that just outside, separated only by a pane of glass, was a woman freezing and heartbroken. A woman who was the legal wife of the host. I pressed my cold palm against the window. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass so they would notice my existence, but my strength was gone. The cold began to gnaw at my consciousness. My lips felt stiff and were turning blue. My vision blurred from the relentless rain on my face. I watched as Robert fed Luna the first piece of cake. Luna accepted it coyly, then wiped a bit of frosting from the corner of Robert's lips with her finger. The scene was so painful it made me nauseous. I remembered our past, when we were struggling in a tiny rented apartment. Back then, Robert promised he would make me happy once he was successful. I had willingly sold the jewelry my late mother left me to fund his business venture. I had willingly peanut butter sandwiches so Robert could afford gas for his old scooter to look for work. All those sacrifices flashed through my mind like a broken old film, and this was my reward. Now that he was successful, now that he had everything, he threw me away for another woman who only showed up once he had reached the top. It turned out loyalty meant nothing to Robert. Wealth and status had blinded his heart. He had forgotten who climbed the steep hill of life with him. Time passed slowly, torturously. I must have been standing outside in the downpour for an hour. My body could no longer feel the cold. There was only a numbness spreading from my toes to my head. My legs gave out, unable to support my weight any longer. I crumpled to the ground, slumping onto the coarse, cold asphalt of the driveway. The rainwater pooled around me, soaking the bottom half of my dress. I shivered violently. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. My breath came in short, heavy gasps. I felt my consciousness fading in and out. In my heart, I prayed that if this was the end of my life, I wanted God to avenge all this pain. I wouldn't die a fool while they reveled inside. Just as my eyes were about to close, a bright light shone from the front gate. The light was blinding, cutting through the thick curtain of rain. I squinted, trying to see what it was. A sleek black car drove slowly into the driveway. It was no ordinary car. From its large, imposing shape and the gleaming emblem on its hood, I knew it was an ultra-luxury vehicle, the kind only owned by the top tier of the wealthy. The car stopped right in front of where I was sitting. Its engine was so smooth it was nearly silent amidst the sound of the rain. The front door opened, and a uniformed chauffeur quickly emerged, unfurling a large black umbrella. The chauffeur hurried to the rear passenger door and opened it respectfully. My heart beat faintly. Who would arrive at this hour in such a magnificent car? Was it one of Robert's wealthiest business partners? A foot stepped out of the car. An expensive-looking, low-heeled shoe touched the wet asphalt. Then, the figure of an elderly but remarkably dignified woman emerged from the car. She wore elegant clothing, though it was covered by a thick coat to ward off the cold. In her hand, she held a walking cane with a handle that glittered like gold. The old woman stood straight under the umbrella held by her chauffeur. Her eyes swept across the yard with a sharp gaze before finally landing on me, lying helpless on the ground. The old woman's eyes widened in shock. She rushed towards me, ignoring the splashes of water that soiled the hem of her clothes. As she got closer, I could see her face clearly in the glow of the porch light. That face, though lined with the wrinkles of age, was one I knew and missed dearly. It was Grandma Kumala, my grandmother from my small hometown, who I had always believed lived a simple life as an old farmer. Grandma Kumala knelt beside me, unconcerned that her knees were getting wet in the puddle. She held my ice-cold face in her warm hands. There was panic and immense anger in her eyes as she saw my condition. She called my name, Olivia, my dear granddaughter. Her voice trembled with a mixture of tears and rage. I could only look at her weakly, unable to speak a word. My lips were too stiff to move. Grandma Kumala quickly took off her thick coat and wrapped it around me. The warmth of the coat slightly eased my shivering. The chauffeur and two large bodyguards, who had gotten out of another car behind hers, immediately approached, ready to assist. But my grandmother raised her hand, signaling them to wait. My grandmother turned to look at the large window. From where we were, she could clearly see what I had just seen. Robert, Luna, and Vivian, laughing happily. My grandmother's jaw tightened. Her gaze, which had been full of love for me, now turned into something terrifying. The look of a predator ready to pounce on its prey. She saw their happiness built on her granddaughter's suffering. She saw the injustice displayed so blatantly before her. Grandma Kumala stood up slowly, aided by her golden cane. She stood tall, radiating an aura of power I had never seen before. She pointed towards the magnificent house with the tip of her cane. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was crystal clear and full of authority, cutting through the sound of the rain. She turned to her head of security, who stood alertly beside her, and uttered one word that would change the fate of everyone in that house forever. Destroy it. The command was absolute. There was not a shred of doubt. The bodyguards nodded in unison, their faces cold and expressionless, ready to execute their employer's order without question. I saw my grandmother look back at me. Her eyes were gentle again, promising the protection I had never received from my own husband. That one-word command from Grandma Kumala was like the trigger for an unstoppable explosion. Like a well-trained Special Forces unit, the 6 burly bodyguards in their crisp black suits moved in perfect unison. They didn't rush but walked with a steady, intimidating rhythm, their heavy boots thudding on the wet asphalt. Their faces were as cold and expressionless as robots programmed for a single purpose: to execute their master's command without a hint of hesitation. Grandma Kumala remained standing in her spot, staring grimly at the large window that displayed the gleeful faces of those who had hurt her granddaughter. As I lay weakly on the ground, a gentle but strong hand helped me to my feet. It was my grandmother's personal chauffeur. He supported me with extreme care, as if I were a fragile, precious object. We moved slowly towards the front door. The rain still poured relentlessly, but the large umbrella held by the chauffeur shielded my grandmother and me from every drop. Ahead of us, the 2 bodyguards at the front of the line had reached the main entrance. Without knocking or asking for permission, one of them kicked the ornate wooden door with a single, powerful blow. A loud cracking sound echoed through the air, even louder than the thunder overhead. The door that Robert had locked so securely was now wide open, its hinges slightly damaged from the force of the kick. A blast of cold night air swept into the warm party room, carrying with it the smell of rain and a thick aura of rage. Inside, the once joyful party atmosphere died instantly. The cheerful music suddenly sounded jarring before being hastily shut off by someone in a panic. All eyes were fixed on the now gaping front door. The guests, mostly business associates and Vivian's socialite friends, froze in place, glasses of champagne still pressed to their lips. Their faces were pale with confusion and fear as they watched a group of large men in black suits storm into the house. Robert, who was about to feed Luna a second piece of cake, dropped his small fork to the floor. The clink of the fork sounded deafening in the sudden, tense silence. Luna immediately hid behind Robert, her beautifully made-up face now tight with fear. Vivian, standing by the cake table, stared wide-eyed, her mouth agape in shock. Robert was the first to recover. His face flushed with anger, he strode forward to confront the bodyguards. He yelled loudly, demanding to know who they were and what right they had to break into his house. Robert threatened to call the police, considering this a criminal act. He assumed these men were hired thugs or daring robbers, but the bodyguards completely ignored Robert's shouting. They didn't even look him in the eye. They continued to advance, spreading out to various corners of the room in a practiced formation, creating a human barrier that separated the guests from the entrance area. Robert tried to push one of the bodyguards, but he was thrown back, as if he had run into a concrete wall. The guard had simply brushed Robert's hand away with a casual but powerful motion, causing Robert to stumble backward, nearly crashing into the buffet table. It was then that Grandma Kumala stepped inside. The rhythmic tap of her golden cane on the marble floor echoed throughout the silent room. Tuk, tuk, tuk. Her steps were slow but full of authority, radiating a power that made anyone who saw her instinctively feel subservient. Behind her, I walked haltingly, supported by the chauffeur. My appearance was a stark contrast to the opulence of the party. My dress was soaked, my hair was a mess, my face was pale, and my lips were blue. Water dripped from my clothes, wetting the expensive marble floor and creating a trail of dampness behind us. Seeing who had arrived, Robert's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then to disdain. He recognized the old woman. Vivian also reacted immediately. She placed her hands on her hips and let out a cynical laugh, a forced laugh to cover the fear she had just felt. Vivian shouted in a shrill voice that she had wondered who was causing such a commotion. It turned out to be just Olivia's grandmother from the countryside. Vivian insulted Grandma Kumala, calling her a shameless old beggar. She asked mockingly if my grandmother had come all the way from her small town just to ask for a handout or party leftovers. Luna snickered at her potential mother-in-law's words, feeling superior again. They were completely oblivious to the real situation. They were blind to the danger, staring them right in the face. Grandma Kumala stopped in the center of the room, directly under the glittering crystal chandelier. She didn't respond to Vivian's insults. Her face remained impassive, but her eyes blazed as she looked from Robert to Luna to Vivian. Her gaze was so sharp and cold, it felt like it could freeze the blood of anyone it fell upon. My grandmother raised her golden cane slightly and then struck it hard against the floor once. The sound of the impact silenced Vivian and Luna's laughter instantly. My grandmother looked straight at Robert and said in a calm yet piercing voice that she had not come to ask for anything, but to take back what should never have been enjoyed by a traitor. Robert frowned, not understanding her words. He still felt powerful in his own home. Arrogantly, Robert ordered us all to leave. He pointed to the door and shouted for me to take my crazy grandmother out before he called the community security to drag us away. Robert said he was disgusted to see his floor dirtied by the rainwater from our clothes. Hearing this, one of my grandmother's bodyguards moved towards Robert, ready to teach him a lesson, but my grandmother raised her left hand, signaling him to stop. She wanted to handle this her way. My grandmother turned to me, who was still shivering. She momentarily released her grip on the cane to neaten my wet hair. Her touch was so gentle, a stark contrast to the murderous glare she had just given Robert. My grandmother whispered to me to be calm and watch how God would work to repay their wickedness tonight. After that, she looked back at Robert and gave a subtle signal to her bodyguards with her eyes. It was the code to begin the first phase of her command: destroy. Without warning, the bodyguards started to move. They didn't attack people, but the symbols of the party's luxury. One of the bodyguards approached the multi-tiered birthday cake. With one powerful sweep of his hand, he shoved the giant cake to the floor. Crash! The beautiful cake was obliterated, its cream and sponge splattering across the white marble. Robert and Luna screamed hysterically as they watched their expensive cake destroyed in an instant. Before they could protest, another bodyguard yanked the tablecloth from the buffet table. Plates, crystal glasses, bowls of fruit punch, and chafing dishes full of gourmet food were all dragged down, shattering with a horrific cacophony. Shards of glass and food scattered everywhere. The female guests shrieked in fear and scrambled back to find cover, afraid of being hit by flying glass or splattered with food. Chaos erupted. Expensive decorations of imported flowers and balloons were torn down. A large framed photo of Robert and Luna, displayed near the entrance, was kicked over, its glass shattering into countless pieces. In a matter of seconds, the once elegant and luxurious party room looked like a shipwreck. Robert tried to charge forward to stop a guard who was smashing a chair, but he was immediately blocked by two other guards who stood as firm as a wall. Robert could do nothing but scream in rage, his face red with explosive emotion. Vivian cried hysterically as she watched her expensive furniture being destroyed. She cursed Grandma Kumala with vile words, calling her an uncivilized savage from the countryside. But Grandma Kumala remained calm, standing unshaken in the middle of the chaos like a general on a battlefield. She seemed to savor every second of the party's destruction. This was just the beginning, I thought. I watched my grandmother pull a slim phone from her coat pocket and type something quickly. A few seconds later, the crystal chandelier in the room flickered and then went out completely. The room was plunged into dimness, lit only by emergency lights and the flashes of lightning from outside the window. The guests' screams grew louder. The party atmosphere was utterly destroyed. As my grandmother had commanded, the birthday party Robert was so proud of had turned into a nightmare he would never forget. Panic swept through the entire room. In the dim emergency lighting, the guests no longer cared about etiquette or social status. They just wanted to get out of what now felt like a hellscape. One by one, the guests pushed and shoved their way towards the exit, navigating through the broken plates and scattered food. No one said goodbye to Robert. No one wished him a happy birthday anymore. The only sounds were hurried footsteps and fearful whispers. They glanced at Grandma Kumala and her bodyguards with terror, not daring to make eye contact. In less than 10 minutes, the once crowded party room was empty. Only we remained: me, my grandmother, the bodyguards, and Robert, Luna, and Vivian, who stood trembling amidst the ruins of their celebration. Robert stared at the empty room with a vacant expression. The party he had spent months planning to boost his prestige among his business colleagues was destroyed in a flash. His reputation was ruined. He turned towards Grandma Kumala, his eyes filled with a deep, seething hatred. He clenched his fists tightly, the veins in his neck bulging. Robert approached my grandmother, ignoring the crunch of broken glass under his shoes. He pointed a trembling finger in her face. Robert shouted that he would sue her for property damage and breaking and entering. He swore he would throw her in jail and let her rot there until she died. Hearing his threat, Grandma Kumala just smiled faintly. It was a deeply condescending smile. She walked slowly to the main sofa in the living room, an imported Italian leather sofa that was Robert's favorite spot to sit while ordering me around. She sat down elegantly, crossed her legs, and placed her golden cane beside her. Her posture declared that she was now the master of this room. Meanwhile, a medic, who was apparently part of my grandmother's entourage, came in with a medical bag. He immediately came to me, sat me down on an intact chair, covered me with a thick, warm blanket, and began to expertly check my condition. I was given warm tea from a thermos they had brought. This special treatment made me feel human again, after being treated worse than an animal by my own husband. My grandmother looked at Robert, who was still standing there, breathing heavily. With a casual motion, she reached into a leather briefcase held by her personal assistant and pulled out a thick, dark blue folder. She tossed the folder onto the coffee table in front of Robert. The slap of the folder on the table sounded loud in the now quiet room. My grandmother told Robert to read the contents of that folder before he spouted any more nonsense about suing and imprisoning people. Robert eyed the folder hesitantly, then glanced at Vivian and Luna, who stood fearfully behind him. With a shaking hand, Robert picked up the folder and opened it. He began to read the documents inside, page by page. At first, his face was confused, but it slowly turned ashen, as white as the paper he was holding. His eyes widened in disbelief. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. His hands trembled so violently that the papers rustled. Luna, curious, peeked at the documents over his shoulder, and her reaction was the same. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock. Vivian, impatient, snatched the papers from Robert's hand and read them herself. Instantly, Vivian's knees went weak, and she collapsed onto the floor as if her bones had been removed from her body. The documents were the original title deed to the luxurious house we lived in, as well as loan agreements for Robert's company amounting to millions of dollars. It was clearly stated that the legal owner of this house was not Robert, but a holding company named Kumala Group. And what was even more shocking for them was that the sole owner of Kumala Group was Grandma Kumala, the old woman they had just insulted as a beggar from the countryside. It turned out that all this time, Robert only had usage rights to the property, which had been put up as collateral. And due to failure to repay debts and a fatal breach of business contracts, for which my grandmother's team had already gathered complete evidence, all of Robert's assets, including this house, had been officially seized by the company, effective immediately. Grandma Kumala spoke, her voice echoing in the silent room. She explained that she had been the secret investor who had funneled funds into the company where Robert worked through trusted intermediaries. She had done it for me, for her granddaughter, so that my husband could be successful and make me happy. My grandmother had given him everything secretly because she didn't want Robert to feel inferior. But what did she get in return? Robert used that success to have an affair, to humiliate her granddaughter, and even to throw her out like a stray dog in a storm. My grandmother said that she could give wealth in the blink of an eye, and she could take it back even faster. Robert dropped the folder. He stared at my grandmother in utter disbelief. He shook his head repeatedly, muttering that it was impossible. It had to be fake. How could a simple country grandmother who always brought rice and vegetables be the owner of a giant corporation that dominated the real estate market? Robert felt like he was in a nightmare. His arrogance was shattered. He realized he had just awakened a sleeping dragon. He had dug his own grave by challenging the person who held his financial life in her hands. Vivian, who had been so fierce just moments ago, now crawled towards Grandma Kumala's feet. Her face was wet with tears of fear. She tried to grab my grandmother's leg, but was roughly pushed away by a bodyguard. Vivian begged for mercy in a hoarse voice. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding. She said she didn't know my grandmother was a wealthy person. She tried to take back her words, praising my grandmother as a kind and generous in-law. It was a pathetic and disgusting sight. The woman who had so arrogantly insulted me and my grandmother was now begging like a slave because she knew my grandmother had money. Luna, realizing the situation had completely turned, began to back away slowly towards a side door. She wanted no part in this bankruptcy. However, my grandmother's eagle eye caught her movement. My grandmother snapped at Luna to stop where she was. My grandmother said that no one was allowed to leave this room until she was finished. Luna froze in place, her face pale with fear. My grandmother looked at the three of them, Robert, Vivian, and Luna, with disgust. She said she didn't need their fake apologies. All she needed was justice for her granddaughter. My grandmother rose from the sofa, taking her golden cane. She walked towards Robert, who was still frozen in silence. My grandmother stated that as of this moment, this house was seized. All the luxury items inside, the cars in the garage, and all the amenities they enjoyed were now the property of Kumala Group. My grandmother gave them a very brief ultimatum. The three of them had to leave this house right now, without taking anything but the clothes on their backs. No jewelry, no cash from the embezzled company funds, no vehicles. Robert tried to protest, saying it wasn't fair. This was his house. He had built it. But my grandmother cut him off sharply. My grandmother said Robert built it with her money, so it was hers. My grandmother glanced at the gold watch on her wrist. She gave them exactly 10 minutes. If they weren't out of the gate in 10 minutes, she would order her bodyguards to help them out in a very disrespectful manner, just as Robert had thrown me out earlier. The threat sounded terrifyingly real. Robert looked at me, his eyes pleading. He hoped that I, his ever-patient and forgiving wife, would defend him. He called my name softly. "Olivia, please help me. We're husband and wife." His voice was pathetic, but I just looked at him with a blank expression. My heart had died for him the moment he shut that door in my face in the rain. I turned my face away, letting my grandmother finish what had to be done. There was no more mercy for a heartless man. The 10 minutes that Grandma Kumala had given them felt like they were slipping away as fast as sand through one's fingers. The atmosphere in the wrecked great room transformed into a stage for pathetic panic. Robert, having just lost all his dignity, ran like a madman towards the master bedroom. He intended to grab any valuables he could save his watch collection, cash from the safe, or the deed to his father's inherited land that might still be there. However, his path was abruptly blocked at the bedroom door. 2 large bodyguards were already standing there, barring his way with their arms crossed and an intimidating stare that made Robert's courage wither. Robert immediately tried to negotiate, begging to be allowed in for just a moment to get his wallet and phone. He argued that he couldn't live without his identification and a means of communication. But the guards didn't budge. In a deep, flat voice, one of them said that Grandma Kumala's instructions were very clear and non-negotiable. Everything in this house, including the wallet and phone bought with company money, was now seized property. Robert screamed in frustration, pulling at his own hair. He turned and headed for the table where the keys to his luxury car lay. He thought he could at least take the car to get away. But once again, the muscular hand of another bodyguard snatched the keys before Robert could touch them. The guard pocketed the keys and stated that the car was registered under the company's name, so Robert had no right to take it. Robert was completely cornered. He realized that Grandma Kumala wasn't bluffing. She truly intended to strip him of everything until he was back at square one, the point where he started before marrying me. Meanwhile, Vivian made a far more humiliating attempt. The middle-aged woman, who always maintained an elegant image, was now wailing while kneeling at my feet. She tried to grab my hand, pleading for mercy with a face flooded with tears and smudged with ruined makeup. Vivian kept repeating the word family. She tried to remind me of the good times they had, though those good times never really existed because Vivian had always looked down on me. Vivian said that I was her favorite daughter-in-law, the most patient and virtuous one. She begged me to persuade Grandma Kumala to call off the eviction. She reasoned that she was old and frail and couldn't possibly survive on the streets without a roof over her head. I looked at my mother-in-law with a flat, emotionless expression. The heart that was once so soft had now turned to ice. I remembered how cruel Vivian's words were when she insulted me earlier. How eagerly this old woman had supported Robert's affair with Luna just because Luna seemed richer. I slowly pulled my hand from Vivian's grasp. In a voice that was calm yet pierced straight to the heart, I said that I remembered very well how this family had treated me. I reminded Vivian that just an hour ago, she was the one who told security to drag me out into a thunderstorm. I said that family doesn't let their own kin freeze to death outside the gate just to defend a stranger. My words struck Vivian's conscience. The old woman fell silent, unable to deny the truth. Luna, on the other hand, tried to be more cunning. She quietly tried to slip out a side door, hoping to escape unnoticed. Her right hand clutched her purse tightly, where she had hidden some jewelry she had managed to snatch from a vanity table during the party. But Grandma Kumala's sharp eyes missed nothing. My grandmother gave a subtle nod to her head of security. The guard swiftly pursued Luna and stopped her right at the doorway. The guard demanded Luna's handbag. Luna struggled, screaming that it was her personal property and they had no right to touch it. A brief tug-of-war ensued before the bag was finally in the guard's possession. The guard turned the purse upside down, and out tumbled rings, necklaces, and a gold bracelet belonging to Vivian, which Luna had apparently stolen. Vivian's eyes widened in shock to see her jewelry in Luna's bag. She couldn't believe the woman she had admired was a thief. The 10 minutes were up. Grandma Kumala struck her cane on the floor once more, a sign that her tolerance had ended. The bodyguards moved in unison. Without excessive physical force, but with absolute firmness, they escorted Robert, Vivian, and Luna towards the main door. Robert tried to resist by clinging to the doorframe, screaming my name one last time, but the 2 guards pushing him were far stronger. He was shoved out over the threshold, followed by a still hysterical Vivian and a cursing Luna. The 3 of them were thrown onto the wet front porch. The rain was still pouring down, as if the universe agreed to wash their traces from the house. The large wooden door was then slammed shut in their faces. Bam! The sound was exactly the same as when Robert had shut the door on me. But this time, the roles were reversed. Robert, Vivian, and Luna were now outside, while I was inside the warmth of a home that was truly mine. From behind the door, the sound of a lock turning twice was heard, ensuring there was no way back for them. Robert pounded on the door with his fists, shouting in frustration, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of thunder. Inside the house, I sat quietly on the sofa. Tears trickled slowly down my cheeks. Not tears of sadness for losing a husband, but tears of relief because the heavy burden that had been crushing my chest was finally lifted. Grandma Kumala put her arm around my shoulder, giving me strength. My grandmother said that from this night on, my life would change completely, and no one would ever be able to hurt me again. The household staff, who had remained silent out of fear of Robert and Vivian, now began to emerge. They looked at Grandma Kumala with respect. My grandmother gave instructions for the house to be immediately cleaned of the party remnants and Robert's remaining belongings. She ordered all of Robert, Vivian, and Luna's personal items to be collected and either burned or donated, because she wanted no trace of them left in this house. I listened to her instructions calmly. I knew this was the first step in cleansing my life of the poison of the past. I looked towards the window, seeing the shadows of 3 people outside, battling their own fate. There was no pity left in my heart, only a sense of justice finally served. The heavy rain drenched Robert, Luna, and Vivian without mercy. In seconds, their expensive party clothes were soaked through, clinging uncomfortably to their skin. A bone-chilling cold seized them, exactly like the cold I had felt just an hour earlier. They stood shivering in front of the tall, sturdy gate that was now locked to them. The garden lights that usually illuminated the yard were turned off, leaving them in a menacing darkness, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. The street in front of the luxury home was deserted. The guests' cars had long since departed, leaving tire tracks on the wet asphalt. None of Robert's friends had waited or offered help. They had all fled at the first sign of his downfall, proving their friendship was based only on money and status. Robert roughly wiped his wet face. He stared at the grand house that was now closed to him, with a vacant expression. His mind was in turmoil. He still couldn't believe his life could turn 180 degrees in a single night. Yesterday afternoon, he was a successful young director, owner of a luxury home, and surrounded by beautiful women. Now, he was nothing more than a homeless man without a single dollar in his pocket. He felt his pockets, hoping for the miracle of a forgotten wallet. But there was nothing. Wallet, phone, car keys, all confiscated. He had absolutely nothing. Regret began to creep into his heart, but not regret for hurting me. It was regret for not investigating Grandma Kumala's background sooner. Vivian shivered violently beside Robert, her teeth chattering loudly. She hugged her body, which was clad only in a thin, formal blouse. Her expensive skirt was now stained with mud. Vivian began to whine, blaming Robert for everything. She weakly slapped her son's arm, asking why Robert was so stupid as to not know my grandmother owned the company. Vivian blamed Robert for mismanaging his assets so they could be seized. She lamented her fate, having to be out in the rain at her age when she should have been sleeping soundly in her plush bed. Vivian's incessant nagging made Robert's head spin. The anger that had been simmering finally boiled over. He snapped at his mother to be quiet. Robert's sharp tone shocked Vivian into silence. She never expected her golden child would dare to yell at her. Luna, standing a little apart from them, looked at Robert with disgust. Her makeup had run, making her beautiful face look grotesque, like a crying clown. Her long party dress dragged on the wet asphalt, making her look ridiculous. Luna wasn't crying, but her eyes burned with immense anger. She felt utterly deceived. She had pursued Robert because she thought he was a wealthy man who could secure her future. She was willing to be a homewrecker for his money, but it turned out Robert was just a poor man living off the charity of his wife's grandmother. Luna felt she had wasted her time on a man with no future. A fight broke out between them. Luna began to curse Robert with harsh words. She called him a liar, a useless man, and a loser. Luna screamed in the rain that she regretted ever meeting him. She blamed Robert for dragging her into this mess and humiliating her in front of so many people. Robert, refusing to be insulted, fought back. He brought up the fact that Luna was also guilty of stealing his mother's jewelry. Robert said Luna was just a gold-digging, heartless woman. Their argument escalated, each blaming the other and exposing their secrets. All the while, Vivian could only cry on the side of the road, mourning her fate. Suddenly, a taxi drove slowly down the street in front of the residential complex, perhaps having just dropped off a passenger nearby. Luna's eyes lit up with hope. Ignoring Robert and Vivian, she ran into the middle of the street, waving her hands frantically to flag it down. The taxi pulled over to the curb. Luna rushed to open the back door. Robert, seeing this, tried to get in too. He thought they could go to a hotel or a friend's place together for a while. Robert grabbed the taxi door, hoping Luna would give him a ride. However, Luna shoved his hand away fiercely. She looked at Robert with a cold, contemptuous glare. Luna said she wouldn't be caught dead in the same car with a bum. She said their business was finished. Luna made it clear she had no intention of living a hard life, taking care of a poor man and his whiny mother. It turned out Luna had hidden a spare credit card and some cash in a concealed pocket of her dress that the guards had missed. She had enough money to save herself. Without a shred of guilt, Luna got into the taxi and slammed the door right in Robert's face. Robert stood frozen as he watched the taxi drive away through the rain, carrying Luna out of their lives. The taxi grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared around a corner. Robert was left behind like worthless trash. He had just experienced a painful dose of instant karma. He had cast aside a sincere wife for a woman he thought loved him, but that woman abandoned him the very second he became poor. Robert turned to his mother, who was still sitting on the wet curb. Now it was just the two of them, without money, without a home, without a vehicle, and without a destination. The cold intensified. Vivian began to cough, a deep, rattling sound. Her face was pale and her lips were blue. Robert realized he couldn't just stand there, or his mother would die of exposure. He had to find shelter. At least a storefront awning or an empty security post. With weary steps, Robert helped his mother up. They staggered down the empty sidewalk, away from the luxurious home they once flaunted. Every step felt immensely heavy. The image of my calm face as they were being kicked out haunted Robert's mind. He realized he had thrown away a diamond to grasp a pebble, and now even the pebble was gone, leaving him with empty hands and a gaping wound. That night was the longest night of Robert's life, the night he learned the true meaning of loss. The harsh morning sunlight stung Robert's skin, forcing his heavy eyes open. He awoke not on his soft, silk-sheeted bed in his comfortable room, but on a hard concrete bench in a public park. His body felt battered, every joint screaming in protest from the unnatural sleeping position. Robert blinked, hoping everything from the previous night was just a nightmare brought on by overwork, but the pungent smell of his damp, dirty clothes quickly brought him back to a bitter reality. He glanced to his side and saw his mother. Vivian was still asleep, curled up against the cold, using her empty handbag as a pillow. Her face looked old and exhausted, the smudged makeup leaving black stains around her eyes. The sight was a slap in the face to Robert. They had truly become homeless overnight. Robert gently woke his mother. Vivian woke with a start, then began crying again as the reality of their situation sank in. Robert tried to comfort her, promising he would sort everything out today. He was convinced this was all just a misunderstanding or an illegal intimidation tactic from Grandma Kumala. Robert still believed he held his position as a director at the company. He thought he could at least go to the office, cash out his final paycheck or bonus, and then rent a hotel for them. With the last of his strength and pride, Robert led his mother on foot towards his office building. It was a long walk, and they had to endure the hot sun on empty, aching stomachs. People on the street stared at them strangely. Their appearance was jarring, wearing crumpled, dirty party clothes. They staggered along like drunks. When they reached the lobby of the magnificent office building, Robert tried to walk in with his chin held high, attempting to summon his former authority. However, he was immediately stopped by 2 security guards. These were the same guards who used to bow respectfully to him every morning, open the door, and greet him warmly. But today, their expressions were cold and firm. One of the guards held out his arm, blocking Robert from going any further. Robert got angry and snapped at them, asking if they didn't recognize their own boss. Robert threatened to fire them if they didn't let him in. The guard replied in a flat tone, without a trace of fear. He informed Robert that his termination letter had come down first thing in the morning, directly from the Central Board of Directors. Not only was he fired, but his name had also been put on the company's blacklist. Robert's photo was even posted at the security desk with a large caption, "Do not admit." Robert gaped in disbelief. He demanded to see the letter. The guard showed him a copy of an internal memo posted on the reception desk. It clearly stated that Robert was terminated with dishonor for gross ethical violations and misuse of authority that had harmed the company. At the bottom of the letter was the signature of the chief commissioner, who turned out to be Grandma Kumala's legal counsel. Robert's world spun. He had been fired in the most humiliating way possible. His access to the office, to his documents, to his personal safe in his room, all of it was gone. Robert tried to plead, saying he had personal belongings inside, but the guard shook his head firmly, stating that everything in Robert's office was currently being audited by the legal team as evidence of asset misappropriation. Robert was forcibly removed from the lobby, pushed out onto the hot sidewalk. Other employees passing by, his former subordinates, now looked at him with scorn. Whispers followed him everywhere. The news of Robert being kicked out of his house and fired had spread like a virus through office chat groups. Robert felt naked, all his shame on display. He had no choice but to go to the nearest bank. He remembered he still had a personal savings account that he hoped was untouched. He left Vivian sitting at a bus stop and ran to the bank. Out of breath, he approached a customer service representative, claimed he had lost his card and wallet, and requested a cash withdrawal. The bank teller asked him to wait for a biometric data check. However, after checking the computer, the teller's face turned serious. The teller informed Robert that all accounts under his name had been frozen by the authorities at the request of his creditor in this case, Grandma Kumala's company, in connection with a civil lawsuit for embezzlement. Not a single dollar could be withdrawn. Robert walked out of the bank in a daze, his feet feeling like they weren't touching the ground. His last hope was gone. He returned to the bus stop where his mother was waiting. Vivian looked at him expectantly, asking if he had money for food and water. Robert could only shake his head weakly. Vivian burst into tears again, this time louder, driven by unbearable hunger. Robert fumbled in a small, hidden pocket inside his suit jacket. He remembered stashing a few $100 bills there for emergencies. It was his only hope for buying lunch. But when his fingers probed the inside of the pocket, he found nothing but empty fabric. The money was gone. Robert's mind raced, recalling the chaos of the previous night. The only person who had hugged him tightly and felt around his jacket was Luna. When Luna had pretended to be scared and hidden behind him, her hands must have been searching for anything she could take. Robert cursed loudly, spitting Luna's name. That woman was truly a devil with an angel's face. She had not only abandoned him but had also stolen the last of the money that could have saved them. Robert and Vivian had truly hit rock bottom, or even below it, penniless, homeless, jobless, and starving. That afternoon, after selling his expensive suit for a pittance at a pawn shop just to get some cash, Robert finally found a place to stay. Not a hotel, not an apartment, but a tiny, cramped room for rent in a filthy, foul-smelling alleyway. The room was minuscule, just big enough for a thin, worn-out foam mattress. The tin roof made the room feel like an oven during the day, and the walls were damp and moldy. Vivian refused to go inside. She was disgusted by the dirty floor and the cockroaches crawling on the walls. But Robert had no choice. The money from the suit was only enough to pay for 1 week's rent and buy some cheap takeout. Forcibly, Robert brought his mother inside. That night, they ate their takeout in silence, accompanied by the noise of neighbors fighting and the buzz of hungry mosquitoes. Their fall from grace was complete. While Robert and Vivian grappled with their suffering in that squalid alley, my life on the other side of the city was transforming dramatically. I was now living in Grandma Kumala's main residence, a magnificent estate surrounded by vast, beautiful gardens. The atmosphere there was so calm and peaceful, a world away from the stress and emotional turmoil I had endured for so long. I no longer had to wake up at dawn to serve an ungrateful husband or listen to the hurtful complaints of my mother-in-law. Here, I was treated like a princess. The staff served me respectfully, attending to my every need before I even had to ask. However, Grandma Kumala didn't let me get lost in luxury. She had big plans for her only granddaughter. Grandma Kumala began to educate me rigorously, but with great affection. She said that tears wouldn't change my fate. Only strength and power could protect me from being trampled on. I was taught the ins and outs of the Kumala Group's family business, from asset management and investment strategy to handling tough business negotiations. At first, I was doubtful and lacked confidence. I felt I was just an ordinary housewife with no special skills, but my grandmother constantly encouraged me, reminding me that the blood of a business leader flowed in my veins. I studied diligently, absorbing all the knowledge she imparted. I wanted to prove that I was not a weak woman who could be so easily discarded. A physical transformation followed my mental one. I no longer wore drab, ill-fitting dresses. Now, I dressed in elegant and classy modern professional attire. My work clothes were custom designed by famous designers, projecting a strong aura of professionalism. My hair was styled impeccably, and my face was adorned with natural makeup that highlighted the beauty that had been hidden under the weight of my past life. The first time I walked into the Kumala Group headquarters as the new CEO, all eyes were on me. The employees bowed their heads respectfully, not out of fear, but out of genuine admiration for the authority I exuded. I led meetings with confidence, making smart decisions that impressed the shareholders. I was reborn as a formidable career woman. The news of my appointment as the sole heir and new leader of Kumala Group spread widely in the media. My face graced the covers of business magazines and television screens. Robert saw the news by chance. He was sitting idly at a roadside coffee stall, waiting for the rain to stop after a long day of doing odd jobs as a manual laborer at the market. Robert's eyes were glued to the old television hanging in the corner. He saw me being interviewed by a reporter. I looked so radiant, smiling confidently and speaking with great intelligence. Robert barely recognized the woman on the screen as the submissive wife he once knew. His heart trembled violently. The regret he had suppressed for so long now erupted uncontrollably. He saw how foolish he had been. He had thrown away a diamond for a worthless stone. Robert thought maybe there was still a chance. Maybe I still had some love left for him. Maybe he could beg for forgiveness and return to a life of luxury as my husband. That desperate and cunning thought pushed Robert to a reckless act. The next day, using the last of his money for bus fare, Robert went to the skyscraper that housed Kumala Group. His appearance was pitiful. His clothes were shabby, his face was gaunt and unshaven, his body was thin and smelled of sweat. He looked like a beggar among the well-dressed professionals of the business district. Robert tried to enter the lobby, his heart pounding as he approached the lavish marble reception desk. He told the beautiful receptionist that he wanted to see Mrs. Olivia. Urgently, he claimed to be her husband. The receptionist looked him up and down with undisguised disgust. She pressed the intercom button, calling security and reporting a mentally disturbed person claiming to be the CEO's husband. Robert got angry and shouted that he was telling the truth. A small commotion ensued. A few people turned and laughed at him. Soon, 3 burly security guards arrived. They didn't say much, simply grabbed Robert's arms and dragged him out of the lobby. Robert struggled, screaming my name as loudly as he could, hoping his voice would reach the top floor, but it was futile. He was thrown out of the building, falling onto the hot sidewalk. His knees were scraped and bleeding. Passers-by looked at him with contempt, assuming he was a crazy homeless man on a rampage. As Robert was trying to get up, wincing in pain, a luxury car pulled up to the lobby. The door opened and I stepped out gracefully, accompanied by my personal assistant. I looked stunning, more beautiful than Robert had ever seen me. Robert felt a surge of hope. He scrambled to his feet and ran towards the car, shouting my name. "Olivia, honey! It's me, Robert, your husband!" he yelled hoarsely. Security guards immediately intercepted him before he could get within 15 feet. I paused for a moment. I turned towards the source of the voice. My eyes met Robert's. He hoped to see a flicker of longing or pity there. But all he received was a flat, cold stare, as if I were looking at an insignificant stranger. There was no emotion, no anger, just absolute indifference. I then turned away, looked forward, and walked into the building without a second glance. The automatic glass doors closed, separating our 2 worlds forever. Robert stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. That wordless rejection was far more painful than 1,000 insults. He realized that the Olivia who had once loved him was dead, killed by his own actions. The air in the tiny rental room was so stale and suffocating it felt as if oxygen refused to enter such a miserable place. The grimy, mold-stained walls emitted a damp odor mixed with the smell of cheap medicine and dried sweat. In a cramped corner of the room, Vivian lay weakly on the thin foam mattress that had long lost its cushion. Her harsh, painful-sounding coughs shattered the quiet of the hot afternoon. Each cough racked her frail body. Her face contorted in pain from the sharp stabs in her chest. The woman who once prided herself on her impeccable appearance with heavy makeup and designer clothes now looked like a living skeleton. Her hair was tangled and white, her skin was sallow, and her eyes stared blankly at the leaking ceiling. There was no trace of the arrogance she used to flaunt in front of me. All that remained was endless regret and pain. Robert sat cross-legged near the half-open door, glumly counting the few coins in his palm. His hands, once smooth from holding nothing heavier than a pen in an air-conditioned office, were now rough, calloused, and covered in scratches from his new job as a porter at the wholesale market. He stared at the meager amount of money with a heavy heart. It wasn't even enough to buy a decent meal, let alone fill his mother's increasingly expensive prescriptions. Robert heaved a long sigh. The weight of his life felt so crushing he could barely breathe. He remembered his glory days when he could spend hundreds of dollars on a single dinner. Now, even a single dollar felt precious. The regret came like a massive wave crashing against a cliff, shattering the last remnants of his pride. He knew he was the cause of his mother's suffering. His greed and infidelity had dragged them into this pit of destruction. Suddenly, the usual noisy clamor of the narrow alley, children shouting, televisions blaring, fell silent. The strange quiet made Robert lift his head. He heard the sound of a very smooth car engine approaching, a sound completely alien in a slum like this. Robert slowly stood up and peered out the door. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw a sleek, black luxury sedan stop right at the entrance of his alley. The car looked utterly out of place against the backdrop of filth and puddles, like an object that had fallen from the sky. The neighbors began to emerge from their homes, whispering in awe and confusion at the sight of such a vehicle in their area. Robert's heart pounded. His gut told him this was no ordinary visitor. The rear passenger door opened slowly. A well-built man got out first, then held the door for the person inside. In the next second, Robert's breath caught in his throat. I stepped out of the car gracefully. My transformation was staggering. I wore a perfectly tailored, elegant business suit that was modest yet exuded a powerful aura. My hair was impeccably styled. My face was clean and radiant, with subtle, professional makeup that highlighted the beauty that had been obscured by suffering when I was Robert's wife. I stood tall, surveying the squalid surroundings with a neutral expression, like a queen inspecting a remote territory. There was no overt disgust, but it was clear I no longer belonged to this miserable world. Robert trembled at the sight of his ex-wife. There was a powerful urge within him to run and cling to my feet, to beg for forgiveness and a second chance. He nervously smoothed down his faded t-shirt and stepped out to approach me. Vivian, hearing Robert call my name, forced herself to get up. Struggling, she dragged her body to the doorway. Vivian's dim eyes lit up with hope when she saw me. In her narrow mind, she thought I had come to take them home, to rescue them from this hell of poverty. Vivian began to cry, calling my name in a hoarse voice, referring to herself as the mother-in-law who missed her daughter-in-law. But their hopes were shattered by my response. I did not step forward to hug or greet them warmly. I stopped at a safe distance, flanked by my two formidable personal bodyguards. I looked at Robert and Vivian in turn, my gaze as cold and sharp as ice. It wasn't a look of anger, but of foreignness, as if Robert and Vivian were complete strangers. Robert tried to speak, to form words of apology, but his tongue felt thick when my assistant stepped forward and handed him a thick manila envelope. Robert accepted it with a shaking hand, still hoping it contained cash or a house deed. With bated breath, he tore it open. His world collapsed for the second time when he saw its contents. They were official divorce papers from the family court. Page after page detailed Robert's transgressions, from neglect and infidelity to psychological abuse, all laid out with irrefutable evidence. I finally spoke, my tone calm, flat, and authoritative. I told Robert to sign the divorce agreement immediately so the proceedings could move quickly. I stated that I did not want my legal status tied to an irresponsible man any longer. I wanted to sever the last thread connecting my life to the dark past with him. The words were spoken without emotion, proving that my heart was truly dead to Robert. Vivian wailed upon hearing my words. She begged me not to divorce Robert so they could be a family again. She promised to change, to be a good mother-in-law, even offering to be my maid if she could just live in a big house again. But I was unmoved. I glanced at my former mother-in-law. There was a flicker of pity in my eyes seeing the old woman's condition, but the memory of how Vivian had cast me out into the storm resurfaced, erasing it. I then took a small white envelope from my handbag. I didn't hand it directly to Robert, but placed it on a rickety wooden chair on their porch. I said that inside the envelope was some money. Robert and Vivian stared at the envelope with hungry eyes. However, my next words were a brutal slap to their pride. I explained that the money was not a settlement, not a division of assets, and certainly not a token of love. It was charity. I was giving it to them purely on humanitarian grounds, as it was my duty to help the poor and destitute. I said the money was for Vivian's medical treatment and for them to eat properly for a few days. After that, I made it clear, there would be no more help. It was my final act of charity for strangers I happened to have once known. After saying that, I turned and walked back to my car without looking back, leaving Robert and Vivian sobbing hysterically on the porch of their wretched hovel. The day the judge's gavel fell was the bleakest day of Robert's life. The sky outside the courthouse was dark and overcast, as if mirroring the man's grim fate. Inside the cold courtroom, Robert sat alone at the defendant's table. He looked pathetic. His shirt was wrinkled and slightly too big for his gaunt frame. His face was unkempt, his eyes sunken and ringed with dark circles from lack of sleep. He had no lawyer, no family for moral support. Across from him, I sat calmly, flanked by a team of top lawyers. I looked radiant, confident, and untouchable. The hearing was swift and decisive. The judge granted my petition in its entirety. Our marriage was officially over. Robert lost any right to assets, as it was proven he had made no financial contribution during the marriage and had, in fact, been a liability. Robert stumbled out of the courthouse. He tried to chase me one last time in the parking lot, screaming my name, hoping for a miracle. But I walked straight to my luxury car without a single glance in his direction. The car drove off, taking with it a piece of Robert's shattered soul. Robert walked home, having no money for fare. When he arrived at the rental, he was met with an even more horrifying sight. His and his mother's belongings were thrown out onto the street. The landlord had forcibly evicted them because the charity money I had given them had run out on medical debts, and they couldn't pay the next month's rent. Vivian sat huddled on the steps of a closed shop near the alley, clutching a bundle of their old clothes. Her face was ashen and her lips were blue with cold. Rain began to fall heavily, drenching the city streets. The situation was a painful déjà vu. Once, Robert and Vivian had been inside a warm house, laughing as they watched me shiver outside. Now, the wheel of fortune had turned 180 degrees. Karma had arrived with terrifying precision. Robert ran to his mother, hugging her frail body to share a little warmth, though he himself was soaked to the bone. They sat there trembling under the awning, exactly like beggars with nowhere to go. Rain, mixed with the tears of regret, streaming down Robert's face. He watched people hurry by, seeking shelter. No one cared about them. Hunger gnawed at their empty stomachs. Vivian mumbled incoherently, regretting her actions, apologizing to God, and calling my name. But it was all too late. Regret always comes at the end, when nothing can be fixed. They were now truly alone in the world, cast out and forgotten. The cold night wind cut to the bone, reminding Robert of the cold I must have felt that night. He now understood the depth of his cruelty. In the depths of his despair, a luxury car passed slowly on the main road in front of them. The car was stuck in traffic from the heavy rain, moving at a crawl, almost stopping right in front of Robert and Vivian. It was Grandma Kumala's Rolls-Royce. Robert's heart seemed to stop. The car's window was clear under the streetlights, revealing the scene inside the cabin as clearly as a perfect diorama of life. Inside the warm, comfortable car, Robert saw me and Grandma Kumala sitting side by side. They seemed to be chatting casually. I was holding a cup of warm tea, its steam rising gently. I laughed freely at something my grandmother said, a laugh so genuine and happy. My face glowed with peace and hope. I looked more beautiful than ever before, more beautiful than when I was with him. I looked like a woman who had reclaimed her lost life. Beside me, Grandma Kumala smiled with pride, gently patting my hand with deep affection. The scene was a brutal contrast to the condition of Robert and Vivian, shivering on the wet, foul-smelling sidewalk. Robert stared, transfixed by the happiness in that car. The pain he felt in that moment was far worse than death. His heaviest punishment was not poverty or hunger, but having to witness with his own eyes that the woman he had thrown away was now living happily without him. I had risen to become a shining diamond, while he had crumbled into street dust. The car slowly began to move again as the traffic cleared. I never once glanced out the window. I did not see my ex-husband and former mother-in-law dying on the side of the road. For me, that past was sealed shut. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, on a bright future. The car moved further away. Its red taillights slowly vanished into the rainy mist, taking with them the only light that had ever existed in Robert's life. Robert dropped his head to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably in the relentless downpour. Beside him, Vivian had no strength left to cry, only staring blankly into the dark street. The one word from Grandma Kumala at the beginning of the story had been perfectly realized: destroy. And that night, under the cold awning of a closed shop, Robert understood that his life was well and truly destroyed utterly and completely, with nothing left and no hope of return.